Hello, this is Rotten Reads Part 3. We're reading the evolution and the illusion of randomness. This next section is called Chance to the Rescue, as a question mark. Oops. Here we go. One answer will occur immediately to anyone properly educated in conventional evolutionary theory: random mutation. The arbitrary change of an organism's genomic sequence is what most obviously happens blindly. This is the sort of change that used to be routinely evoked by mentioning the mutagenetic effects of cosmic rays, the impacts of blind chance that are supposed to provide a raw material for natural selection to act upon. In addition to natural selection, I could speak of other processes often considered to be forces of evolution: migration, physical constraints upon development, genetic drift, assortative mating, and so on. But none of this would alter the course of my argument. As for mutation, it will become evident that I use the term broadly to include recombination and other sorts of genetic change. I should also mention that this essay focuses upon more complex organisms, often citing work on animals and humans. There are other stories equally dramatic to be told at the lower end of the scale of complexity. Of course, every creature spends a lifetime encountering unpredictable impacts from its environment. No one would say in general that such encounters, even if they were truly random in some sense, overcome the coherent, insistent, and distinctive life of the organism. Rather, they are occasions for expressing that life. Engagement with the never fully predictable larger environment is what life is about. And it's always happening in a way that is influenced not only by the environment, but also the preferred way of being of the organism. A great deal hinges upon the organism, takes up the things it encounters. Randomness in environmental encounters, if the idea makes any sense at all, does not imply randomness in the organization. This implies as much to cosmic ray encounters as it buffets as to buffet, I don't know, by the wind or attacks by predators. Oh, is it buffet? I don't know how to say that. Buffetings? I'm assuming the wind carries it away and attacks by predators. There, I just got 100% on my IQ test. What does this word mean if you've never heard of it before? Can you guess by its use in a sentence? All we can possibly mean by random occurrences relative to an organism is occurrences that have not yet been woven into the meaningful life story of the organism. And even before any such weaving takes place, the idea that an event is random only perplexes our understanding. We are immersed in, we participate moment by moment in a world that is ordered and full of meaning. And it is hard to see how we can detach ourselves so fully from our context as an encounter something wholly out of context. As for genetic mutation specifically, the crucial point is already made by Oxford University biophysicists Norman D. Cook in 1977. He says biological intervention through enzymes and enzyme systems is the principal mechanism of in vivo mutation. Biologists commonly interpret such mutations as random errors in vital processes such as DNA replication. But if changes in the genetic material are indeed mediated by other cellular molecules, then the idea of randomness lacks all but the most trivial descriptive meaning, referring only to our knowledge of the mutation event. Furthermore, as British radiologist B.A. Bridges pointed out, Even studies of radiation-induced mutation in bacteria have shown that cellular repair systems are necessarily for nearly all the mutagenetic effects of ultraviolet and around 90% of all of that of ionizing radiation. Let me read that again, because even I had a hard time following that one. Furthermore, B.A. Bridges pointed out that even studies of radiation-induced mutation in bacteria have shown that cellular repair systems are necessary for nearly all of the mutagenetic effects of ultraviolet and around 90% of that of ionizing radiation. That is, outcomes depend on, at least in part, of what the organism does with the influences impending upon it. You might think that radiation mostly causes very local alterations in DNA, corresponding to the immediate location of damage. Yet the great majority of radiation-induced mutations involve large regions of DNA, often encompassing more than an entire gene, spanning thousands of nucleotide base pairs or letters of the genetic sequence. The organism making such changes is apparently prepared to respond at best it can and in its own way when it engages these potentially harmful elements of the environment. Despite the fact that early work on ionizing radiation provided the genetic basis for modern evolutionary theory and quickly became a theoretical cure-all for the difficult problem of genetic diversity, Cook's phrases. This particular cause of mutation hardly figures centrally in the broad literature on genetic change today. There are simply too many other relevant processes going on, and none of them look like the cosmic ray activity whose misconstrual as a kind of archetype of randomness was so vile to the formulation of evolutionary theory. In fact, we are no longer free to imagine that evolution waits around for accidents to knock genes askew so it can provide new material for natural selection to work on. The genome of every organism is actively and insistently remodeling as an expression of its context. Genetic sequences get rewritten, reshuffled, duplicated, turned backwards, invented from scratch, and otherwise revised in a way that predominantly advertises the organism's accomplished skill in matter of genomic change, genomic change. The illustrations, excuse me, hang on. The illustrations of the skill are so intensive in the contemporary literature that there is no way to review it adequately here. For some examples, see the supplement Natural Genome Engineering below, which contains the bulk of the evidence for my contentions here. And regardless of the source of mutation or genetic change, one cannot ignore the explosively growing literature on how genes actually function within gene regulation networks. A mutation is subject not only to elaborate processes, And regardless of the source of mutation or genetic change, one cannot ignore the explosively growing literature on how genes actually function within gene regulation networks. A mutation is subject not only to elaborate processes that repair, modify, or ignore the mutation, but also to regulatory networks that respond to the mutated gene according to the logic of the larger need. You will recall from previous article how an organic context can retain a certain stable character in the face of relatively wide-ranging variations or disturbances in the lower level constituent processes. Molecular biologists have discovered in studies with a number of organisms, including mice, that knocking out or disabling or mutating. Both copies of a gene with important functions can, in many circumstances, leave the gene seemingly unimpaired and functionally normal. That's interesting considering what I'm learning. But even leaving aside all the contextually coherent revisions and all the meaning making that bends the apparent random to the organism's own purposes, we find that strictly low level analysis show mutations to be non random. The point isn't disputed by anyone. The current research aimed at eliciting all the factors conducive to genomic changes is steadily expanding our field of view with huge implications for evolutionary theory. This leaves but one last refuge for those who would persuade us that the mutational elements of evolutionary change is blind, lifeless, and meaningless. Their argument runs this way. Mutations are commonly said to occur randomly. However, mutations do not occur at random with respect to genomic location and gender, nor do all types of mutations occur with equal frequency. So what aspect of mutation is random? Mutations are claimed to be random in respect to their effect on the fitness of the organism carrying them. That is, any given mutation is expected to occur within the same frequency under conditions in which this mutation confers an advantage on the organism carrying it, as under conditions in which this mutation confers no advantage or it is deleterious. Or as Douglas Futuyama, distinguished professor of ecology and evolution at the State University of New York at Stony Brook, once put it. Mutation is random in the sense that the chance that a specific mutation will occur is not affected by how useful that mutation would be. So not even mutations, it turns out, are really random. There is only one crucial respect in which we need to declare them random, if we would deduce to an illusion of the meaningful coherence of all the rest of life. They are, in the special sense just given, random with respect to their effects upon fitness, and therefore in the evolutionary role. So runs the prevailing belief. Is there any excuse for the huge burden of meaninglessness attached to the slender thread of presumed chance, epitomized in cosmic rays? Epitomized? Or is this sense of meaninglessness merely an illusory spell woven by evolutionary biologists? More particularly, does the concept of randomness gain clarity when we set it as we are advised to do beside that of fitness? We will see. And that concludes part 3